Okay, so in this video, we are going to start by creating an EC2 instance that we'll use to host our websites as well as for development using Visual Studio. So at this point, the assumption is that you've got your AWS account created and you've gone through those steps. And there's a video prior to this that kind of covers that. Once you log into the AWS Management Console, you'll be presented with a number of different options here. So again, there's quite a bit. If you want to kind of get a sense, if you click on services on top of the page, you can kind of get a sense of just all the different offerings that AWS has. So there's quite a bit here, and again, this course only really scratches the surface. There's other courses that cover more detailed information on all of these different offerings, but for our purposes, we are going to focus primarily on just a few, including things like EC2. So EC2 is Amazon's virtualization or virtual machine, if you will. It stands for Elastic Cloud Compute, and that's how we provision our different servers or different resources to host our applications and do other things. But essentially, we're going to focus on that one. A couple things I'll just kind of point out about the interface is that you can obviously filter. So you'll see you can kind of filter for EC2, or if you wanted to do something else where you want to look at like security, we can look at security by typing IAM and so forth. So whatever service you want to, if it's not easy to find, just filter for it. You can also, if you want, you can pin ones that you use often. So I've pinned a few that I like here. I use EC2 a lot and S3 and some of these other ones, but if there's other ones that you want to do like CloudFront, you can just drop them up here and really kind of customize how you want your interface to look. So that's just kind of a quick little thing that you can do if you want to kind of improve your navigation, so it's a little easier to navigate. There is a history, so it'll kind of remember the last few that you've done, so you can kind of get to the history as well. So as you go into these, the history is going to change to the most recent ones. All right, so let's focus primarily on EC2, and here's kind of where we can kind of see an overview of all of the different virtual machines that we've created. Now, right now, when you first default, we don't have any. So, but if you click on, for example, running instances, I have a couple here that I've recently terminated, and those will go away. We'll talk a little bit more about what these different states mean, but here's kind of where you can kind of see all of your different machines that you have provisioned and you happen to be using, and the various states of those machines. Other thing I'll point out real quick, it's important within AWS that you provision the different resources all in the same region. Amazon is kind of broken down into different regions and availability zones. And if you want to make sure when you create something that you put it in the region that is with all other things that you've created. Otherwise, it may or may not be able to access everything, or it might be a performance issue depending on what you're doing. But the easiest thing to do is just make sure, if you look up here at the top, these all drop down, you can kind of see all the different regions that are available. For our purposes, we're going to be using Northern Virginia, which is referred to as US East 1. So make sure that's kind of what you see there. You can also see up here on the screen, sometimes you'll see it also listed as US East 1. Just make sure that you've kind of at least looked at that. Usually it'll retain the region so you don't really have to worry about it accidentally flipping to one of these other ones unless you actually do it yourself. So it'll always stay at that same region. Okay. But right now what we have to do is inside of EC2, the dashboard, we're going to go ahead and create an instance and kind of walk through those steps. So what we're going to do is we're going to click Launch Instance. And when you select Launch Instance, you're going to be presented with a whole list of various what we call AMIs, or Amazon Machine Images, that are available for us to provision. Think of them as like templates that have already been created. So we can take one of these templates and create a brand new virtual machine using that same template, so it basically is an identical copy of it. Okay, so this list is quite extensive. You can create Linux machines, and there's also other ones that you can get from like Amazon Marketplace that people have created their own versions of these, AMIs that have specific services already installed, and there's a number of different ones that you can do, and there's quite a few. We won't spend too much time on those ones, but what we're going to do is we're going to actually use the quick start, and we're going to create our own EC2 instance. Now, for our purposes, since what we're going to be demonstrating in this course is going to be creating web applications using Visual Studio, using Microsoft's technology stack, if you will. So since that's going to be primarily the one we're using, we're going to want to provision a Windows machine. So we can come to the filter, hit Windows, and you get presented with all these different flavors. For our purposes, we'll go ahead and select just a basic one. We don't need some of these other ones, but if you had a website that you wanted that needed to have SQL Server with it, you can do that as well. So there's quite a bit here, but keep in mind that with anything you do within AWS, there is a cost that goes with it. So you have to be careful about that. And we'll talk about some strategies. We all have a specific budget that we're trying to stay within. So we'll talk about how we maintain that budget. So when you provision a Windows Server machine, you are also actually provisioning the license for that as well. So there is a cost associated with it. Some of the machines are referred to as free tier eligible. So what those will mean is that if you select that one, you may, if you've just recently created an AWS account, there's a period of time where some of those resources are free for you to try it out. I mean, Amazon wants you to try out different things, and that's what EC2 instances allow us to do, is quickly create machines and throw them away when we're done. So it's kind of intended to be a way for you to play around and get familiar with it as well. But eventually, you're going to be charged for all of what you use. Okay. So again, we're going to pick Windows Server 2019 base. We'll select that one. And here is kind of another piece of the puzzle in terms of how the costing works. When you provision an AMI, the next step after you've selected what OS you want to have on it, you're also going to be able to decide how big of a virtual machine do you need, how many CPUs do you need, how much memory do you need, and so forth. And with each one of these different machines, you can kind of see these different types here. Each one represents a slightly different version. So if we select T2 large, that means we're going to get a virtual machine that has two virtual CPUs and 8 gigabytes of RAM. Okay. If I select T2 extra large, we're going to get a virtual machine with a quad core 4 and 16 gig. Right now, since we're going to be using Visual Studio 2019, this is the one we're going to select. We're going to select the T2 extra large. And you can kind of see how that goes. But with each one of these, there's going to be a different amount that you need to pay, or there's a different costing formula for that. So now the question you always want to ask is, well, how much is it going to cost me if I select T2 micro or if I select T3A medium? Well, what's is that $100 a month? Is that $3,000? What's that cost? Well, fortunately, AWS offers us a calculator that we can use for that purpose. So in order to kind of give you a sense, if I go ahead and come up here to a new browser window and I type in, let's see here, AWS calculator EC2, you'll see that there's going to be a simple monthly calculator, so you can kind of get to this a bunch of ways. I just searched for it. We're going to go ahead and click the simple monthly calculator for our purposes. But here's kind of where you can fill out basically a set of screens based on what you're trying to do, right? And then determine from that, it'll tell you exactly, hey, this is roughly what this is going to cost you to use this for a month. So depending, right, if you're doing things like S3 or Route 53 or some of these other services, right, you can get into each one of these and really build out kind of an idea of what it's going to cost you. For our purposes, we're going to be using the US East region, and we're going to be creating an EC2 instance. So let's start with that one. So I'm going to come in here, and in this calculator, you can decide, well, we're only creating one instance, but let's say you want to create 5, right? What's it cost me if I want to create 5 of these instances and I'm going to utilize them, 100% of the time, meaning the entire month, right? What's that going to cost me, and so forth. But we're only doing one, so we'll just keep it at one. And it defaults to a Linux machine here, but we're not using Linux, so we have to go down and select, well, we're using the Windows because that's what we selected. So we want to make sure that we do that so that we get the costing that includes the Windows license, because unlike Linux, Windows has a license that we have to also pay for. So we'll scroll down here to what we selected, which was T3 extra large. All right, close and save. And we're going to do this on demand. So if we ran this for an entire month, it would cost $351 for that month. So we really, again, we only have a limited budget here. So we're going to have to play around with this a little bit and come up with a better way of doing it, because that's obviously would exceed our budget if we ran this 24/7. So if we ran this machine with Windows 24/7 for an entire month, that's the cost, right? But we can kind of do things like, all right, let's, instead of doing an entire month, what if we only ran it for, 4 hours a day, right? Well, if I do that, right, then the cost for that per month is only $58, $60, right? So it's a lot. It's a lot better. Actually, I think I picked the bigger. Let me pick a smaller machine here. I don't think I need it quite that big. So come back down here to this, and I'm picking this one. There we go. All right. So yeah, so even with that, it's still not bad. If I want to run it for maybe 12 hours, 40 hours, let's just say I run it to restore in the day, just on the work hours, right? $41 a month. So kind of get a sense. So we're going to do some things, and we'll talk about some strategies for how we maintain this. Basically, what we want to do with our machine we're provisioning is we want to shut it down when we're not using it. We'll talk about that next. Okay, but the simple monthly calculator is kind of what you can use to kind of get a sense of how much things are going to cost. All right, so we're going to select the T2 extra large. Now, this is because we're using Visual Studio 2019. These are the requirements for Visual Studio 2019. It needs a quad core and 16 gigabytes of memory. Well, how would I determine that? Well, if you come up here to Google and you type in Visual Studio 2019, and I type in, we'll type in 2019 requirements. All right, so let's see what it says here. Here you can kind of get a sense, it'll give you a sense of what you need. So here's what we need to do. Here's all the operating systems that it supports. We're using 2019, so that's why that one's fine. We need to have 1.8 gigahertz faster processor with a quad core, so that's why we chose the 4. And we need to have, says 8 gigabytes of RAM, but we have a little more than that. So we're gonna include a little more higher. The more RAM you have, the better it's going to perform. So we're going to keep it the way we have it. And some of these other things, right? How much memory you need. So that's kind of how you get the requirements. So we're going to use that to pick the correct one, and we're going to select configure instance details. These are various extra things you can do. For the most part, we're good. We don't have to change anything, because we won't spend a lot of energy on this right now, but that'll get us going. We don't need anything else. We'll click storage. By default, we get 30 gigabyte storage, but to be safe, you might want to just bump it to 50 just so we have enough space. Again, as you increase the storage, you're also going to be charged for storage. So again, that calculator can help you determine what that is. We don't need to use encryption for this one as well, so that should be sufficient. So this is where this will provision the machine with enough disk storage so we can actually save our projects out. And we don't have to pick any tags. Security groups. Security groups is kind of how you set up the rules that you need for your EC2 instance. So in our case, think of it as like a firewall. By default, when you provision a machine, an EC2 machine, you can't actually get to it, right? It's locked down. Now, you need to be able to get into it so you can do things remotely, and that's why, by default, the one service that is available is RDP. We're going to be using RDP for remote, stands for remote desktop, and it uses port 3389. So if you're not familiar with what that means, it basically TCP/IP kind of has different ports that have to be open. All the services like HTTP uses port 80, RDP uses 3389, Secure Shell uses 22. All these different well-known ports need to be opened or closed in order for you to be able to reach the machine with that port number. It's kind of, think of it as just a connection number, right? And that connection is either open or closed. And if you've closed that port, basically you've closed the ability to establish that connection with that service, right? So by default, nothing is there. But what we want to do is we definitely want to be able to remote into it. So we're going to open up port 3389, and fortunately, AWS kind of does that for us. You can decide. This source here basically means who's able to get to it. Is this going to be something that anybody in the world can see, which is what I can choose there. But I can also decide that I only want to be able to reach this workstation using RDP, using my IP address only. So there's extra security protocol that you can set. You can decide if you want to do that. Just be aware that if you try to get to this in a different machine or a different workstation, then you may not be able to reach it. So for right now, for our purposes, let's just leave it open so that we can RDP from anywhere. We won't have to worry about it. But for security standpoint, you obviously would like to lock that down. There's going to be 2 additional rules that we want to add. One is, since we're writing web applications, we want to be able to reach our server using HTTP, which is port 80. And we want that to be anywhere, right? We want to be able to run this, and anybody can connect to the websites that we're going to create. A third one that we'll create here is HTTPS. So we may or may not be using 443, but it's always a good idea to if you're going to be doing websites, just to open them both up so that if you decide to use secure HTTP, then you'll be able to reach it through that port as well. We want that one to be anywhere. Now we're going to create a new security group, and we'll just call this IT431 dev. All right. All right. So these are rules. So basically, these are all of the different services that we'll be able to use against the EC2 instance that we're just getting ready to provision. All right. So we'll click Review and Launch. This is kind of giving us some warnings. Yep, we know we opened up to the world. We know that we're not going to be using the free tier because we need a slightly bigger machine. Here's kind of a rundown of all the services that we have, and ready to launch. Now, when you click launch, you're going to be presented with one final screen. And this is a very important screen because what's going to happen is AWS is going to provision this EC2 instance. It's going to basically be a Windows machine sitting out on the internet. Now, what we have to do is we need to be able to get to it, okay? And we need to be able to log in. Now, by default, the administrator password is something that we need to be given to us, right? And we have to do it in such a way that it's secure. So in order to do that, what we have to do is create, we have to have access to a security key pair. So basically uses public-private key encryption to encrypt the administrator password so AWS can give it to us. Without having that administrator password, we'd have no way to be able to remote into the machine, which is what we need. So we're going to create a key pair, and you have to decide. You can use an existing key pair, so you can create multiple instances and they all use the same key pair, which is a pretty good idea. Or if you want, you can create new key pairs for every single EC2 instance you create. I'm going to create a new key pair. I'm going to call it IT431 key, and I'm going to download it. Now, it's very important to make sure when you do this that you do download it here. This is the only time you'll be able to download this public-private key set, right? So if we don't do that, if we skip the step or we lose this this file, right, we're never going to be able to decrypt the administrator passwords for EC2 instances that we create. So we have to make sure we hold on to that. So please be careful. Make sure you kind of hold on to this and know where you store it to, and just save it so that you can always refer back to it. And we'll talk about how we use this key later on. So we have our key pair. Now we're ready to launch. Now at this point, the instance is being provisioned. So this may take a few minutes for that to go. You can click on View Instances, and you can kind of see this little spinning icon here. is provisioning this machine. Right now it's in the state is pending, meaning it's not completely been provisioned yet. You can kind of see which availability zone it's going into, the size, and so forth. Eventually, this is going to go to a state of running, and that's kind of, once it gets to a state of running, then we'll be in a position to then connect into it. So let's go ahead and wait for that. Okay, after it's been running for a while, we can now see that we have a running state of instance state of running, and our health checks have passed. So this instance here is now ready to go. You have the option, if you want, to come in here and put a name in here. I'll put this one, IT 431 dev box. Okay, just kind of an initial name for it. And now this instance is ready to go. So in the next video, we'll cover how to connect into this instance.